Chapter 1. Shadows and Silver Linings. Rachel Morgan wasn't used to being noticed. At 29, she had spent the better part of the last decade serving burgers and fries at a place called the Iron Fork. Nestled on the corner of a busy intersection in Cedar Falls, the diner had its regulars, its late-night rushes, and its unwritten rules. None of them had ever worked in Rachel's favor. Most days started before dawn. She'd wake up in the tiny two-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger brother, Luke. He was barely 18, juggling high school with night classes at the community college. Their parents were long gone, victims of a highway accident that left Rachel scrambling to pick up the pieces years ago. Luke was all she had left. The Iron Fork wasn't glamorous. Its reputation in town was mixed. Some swore by its breakfast platters. Others warned newcomers about its rude staff and inconsistent service. Rachel fell somewhere in between. She kept her head down, did her job, and tried to keep out of the crossfire between her coworkers, most of whom treated the job like a social club rather than a place of work. She hated it. Hated the way the manager, Greg Taylor, played favorites. Hated the way customers with flashy watches and wallets full of $100 bills got all the attention, while hardworking folks like herself were brushed aside. But she needed the paycheck. Luke's tuition wouldn't pay itself. Rent was due every month like clockwork, and the second she let up, they'd be out on the street. And so, Rachel endured. Until the night, everything changed. Chapter 2. The Man at Table 9. It was a Saturday evening, and the Iron Fork was slammed. The air was thick with the scent of frying bacon, the tang of bleach from the freshly mopped floors still clinging to the air. Rachel balanced a heavy tray on one hand, weaving her way through tables crowded with impatient customers. At the counter, her coworkers Megan and Travis lounged lazily, their attention fixed on their phones instead of the growing line near the door. Rachel shot them a glare, but it bounced right off their indifference. That was when he walked in. The man wore a crisp button-up shirt tucked neatly into dark slacks. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his shoes polished to a shine. But when he approached the host stand, there was no greeting. No welcome. Megan glanced at him, then turned her attention back to the man in a designer jacket, flashing an expensive watch. Travis didn't even look up. Something inside Rachel snapped. She slid her tray onto a nearby table, straightened her apron, and approached the man with a practiced smile. "Good evening, sir," she said warmly. "Welcome to the Iron Fork. Can I get you a table?" The man studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Well, it's nice to finally be noticed." Rachel's cheeks warmed, but she pushed forward. She led him to a quiet booth near the window and handed him a menu. "My name's Rachel. I'll take care of you tonight." He nodded. "Thank you, Rachel." She made sure his coffee was hot, his order was perfect, and his experience was the kind that made people want to return. She didn't know who he was. Didn't care. She treated him the way she treated everyone who walked through those doors, because it was the right thing to do. What she didn't know was that this small act of kindness was about to change everything. Chapter 3. The Fall. The next morning, Rachel arrived at work to find the atmosphere unusually tense. Greg stood by the register, arms folded across his chest, his gaze sweeping the room like a security camera. Megan and Travis whispered by the soda fountain, their smirks unmistakably aimed in Rachel's direction. She hadn't even clocked in when Greg called her into his office. The room was small and stifling, the air stale with the scent of old coffee. Rachel sat down, her palms damp. "We've been evaluating our staffing needs," Greg said, his tone flat, "and we decided to make some cuts." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "You're fired, effective immediately." Her stomach dropped. "That doesn't make any sense." "My performance." Greg leaned back in his chair, feigning sympathy. "It's not personal. Your attitude just doesn't align with the company's values." Rachel clenched her fists in her lap. She knew exactly what this was. Punishment. For treating someone fairly. For not playing along with their petty games. But arguing wouldn't change anything. Without another word, she stood, walked out of the office, and then out of the restaurant, her last paycheck in hand and nothing else. That night, Rachel sat on the worn-out couch in their apartment, staring at the envelope. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Luke's tuition bill sat on the table, unopened. There was no backup plan. And then her phone rang. Chapter 4. The Proposal. Good evening, Rachel Morgan. This is Daniel Reed. She blinked, confused. I'm sorry, who? We met yesterday, at the Iron Fork. Her heart pounded. Oh yes, of course. I have a proposal for you, he said smoothly. Meet me tomorrow morning. 7:30. Greystone Cafe downtown. She barely slept that night, her mind racing with possibilities she couldn't quite believe. But when morning came, she pulled on her best outfit, a simple navy blouse and black slacks, and made her way to the cafe. Daniel was already there, seated at a corner table. His charcoal suit was immaculate, and a steaming cup of coffee sat in front of him. You're the owner, Rachel said as she sat down, realization dawning. Daniel nodded. I visit my restaurants unannounced, to see how they really operate. She sat back, stunned. What I saw at the Iron Fork was concerning, he continued. Staff playing favorites. A manager turning a blind eye. Employees following that example. He met her gaze. But then I saw you. Rachel swallowed hard. You treated me like any other customer, he said. Not because you thought I was important, but because it was the right thing to do. She shifted uncomfortably. I just believe people deserve to be treated fairly. That's exactly why I want you to come back, Daniel said, sliding a business card across the table. Not as a waitress. As the manager. Rachel's breath caught. A manager? I've never. You understand how it should run, he said. You see what's wrong. Now I want to see if you can fix it. Her mind swirled with doubt. Could she really lead the same people who had dismissed her? Sabotaged her? Daniel seemed to sense her hesitation. Take the night to think about it, he said quietly. But if you're ready to stop taking orders and start giving them, I'll be waiting. Chapter 5. Taking the Lead. 2 days later, Rachel stood outside the Iron Fork. This time, she wore a tailored navy blue manager's uniform. Her name tag gleamed under the morning sun. When she stepped inside, conversations died mid-sentence. Megan and Travis froze. Greg, emerging from the back office, turned pale at the sight of her. What the hell is this? Greg barked. Rachel met his glare calmly. I'm a new manager. Greg scoffed. Like hell you are. He turned, his voice sharp. Where's Reed? As if on cue, Daniel walked in, hands casually in his pockets. You don't need to speak to me, Greg, he said, his voice cool. Because I'm here to speak to you. Greg squared his shoulders. You're making a mistake. Daniel's expression didn't change. No, Greg. You did. You're fired. Greg's face turned crimson. You'll regret this. Rachel didn't flinch. This place deserves better than you. Greg stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Chapter 6. The Battle for Control. The days that followed weren't easy. Megan and Travis dragged their feet. Orders came out wrong. Customers were overcharged. Rachel knew it wasn't incompetence. It was sabotage. She spent long nights poring over the restaurant's financial logs, cross-referencing transactions, looking for patterns. And then she found it. Late-night adjustments, inflated prices, refunds that never made it to the customers. One login kept popping up, Travis's. She confronted him after hours. Do you want to explain this? He hesitated, then sighed. It was Megan. She told me to do it. But he looked away. It's Greg. He's behind it. He's paying employees under the table to sabotage you. Rachel's blood ran cold. This wasn't just petty revenge. It was a power play. The next morning, Rachel gathered the staff. On the screen behind her, the logs told the story. I know who's been tampering with the system, she said. Anyone involved has two choices. Own up now or leave. Silence. Then Travis stepped forward. It was me, he admitted. But Megan told me to. Megan's face twisted with rage. You little. Enough, Rachel said sharply. Megan, you're fired. Megan stormed out, slamming the door behind her. And then Daniel walked in. Greg followed, wearing a smug grin. You really think you've won? Greg sneered. Daniel ignored him. Rachel, how do you want this handled? She met his eyes. This place deserves better than Greg. Daniel nodded. Greg, you're done. Permanently. Greg's smirk faltered. He looked around, but no one stood up for him. Without a word, he walked out for the last time. Chapter 7. A New Era. Weeks passed, and the Iron Fork flourished. Without favoritism and corruption, employees found new purpose. Customers noticed the difference. The restaurant turned a corner, and Rachel proved a restaurant could thrive on fairness and hard work alone. Then Daniel returned with another offer. "Ever thought about managing multiple locations?" he asked. Rachel blinked. "You mean, I want you to oversee more than just this one," he said, smiling. "You've built something incredible here. I want to see if you can do it on a larger scale." Rachel took a deep breath. A month ago, she was a waitress struggling to be noticed. Now, she was being given the opportunity of a lifetime. She met Daniel's gaze and smiled. "When do I start?"